The prologue from Always Enact Fidelity to Me by His Divine Presence, Avatar Adidar Samraj. To all who would find heart-breaking freedom. 1. My beloved everyone, I have come here to offer you the complete divine way. I submitted myself utterly to the conditions of humanity in order to once again realize and thereafter reveal the way of divine self-realization in truth. My divine avataric work of teaching and self-revelation was brought out of me through this, my ordeal of divine avataric self-submission. That submission took the form of my living consideration relative to all beings and all things. Therefore, my teaching revelation is not a mere transformation of ideas, otherwise found in the great tradition of humankind. Rather, my teaching revelation was entirely brought out of me, first, through the ordeal of my own years of testing by experience, and then, after my divine reawakening, through the ordeal of my all-encompassing reality consideration with my devotees. 2. The world into which I was born is empty. Therefore, I had no choice but to discover the truth myself. Even as an infant, I saw that I would have to be the world in order to divinely reawaken here. I was spontaneously moved to take on all the qualities that I have found here, and I struggled until I transcended them all. This utter submission to the human condition, for the sake of the most ultimate divine liberation of every one, is my unique freedom. And this freedom, rather than any puritanical or moralistic characteristic, is the sign of my purity. This purity, rather than any conventional measure, is the right basis for people's valuing of me, for their devotion to me, for their devotional recognition of me, and their devotional response to me. I am not withdrawn in the Eastern manner. I conjoined myself with this Franklin body here in order to conform to the West, so that I could teach in the West. My divine avataric self-submission brought the complete teaching out of me, the teaching that transcends both the East and the West, including all, without excluding any. In the years of my divine avataric teaching work and my divine avataric revelation work, I developed the full and complete practice of the reality way of Adidam through my incarnation, through my interaction and reality consideration with those who approached me as my devotees, and they were, in general, ordinary, self-indulgent Westerners. I made my divine avataric self-submission to them just as they were, and I struggled ceaselessly to straighten them out. Indeed, that process of straightening out my devotees, by submitting to teach them in the midst of their habits and illusions, is what I did in all the years of my divine avataric teaching work and my divine avataric revelation work. The universal human confusion was there to be purified in my devotees, but I did that purifying work for the sake of all. In the years of my divine avataric teaching work and my divine avataric revelation work, I did not work with conventional super straights. I worked with people who were moved to drop social taboos, who had no myths they felt obliged to believe in, people who very much wanted to enter into a free consideration about spiritual practice and everything in life. Therefore, I dealt with everything as an open consideration, and it was a remarkably difficult process. Through that process, I revealed the truth and the life of truth. I offered this process of open consideration to those who were interested. On the one hand, there are people who do not want to deal with an open consideration of life, who prefer instead to live by their culturally inherited presumptions and values without questioning them. On the other hand, there are people who find they cannot accept the culturally prevailing presumptions and values and are moved to a real investigation of life, and such were the people with whom I considered things. The people who approached me asked, both explicitly and by virtue of their lack of human maturity, implicitly, that I deal with the foundation matters of human life, the entire realm of human existence that I have described in summary as money, food, and sex. If I had not entered into this consideration with them, they would not have been prepared for spiritual life because they had no ability to deal with the foundation matters. They were full of problems related to money, food, and sex, and full of limitations imposed by the social persona or the social ego. Such was, in fact, inevitably the case, because that is what the human world is, and that is what they came from. I have always worked in a free and unconventional manner. I was not a local pastor. As the basis for my dealing with any and all who approach me, I presume that they have come to me for the most perfect divine self-realization. I know what it takes for people to realize me most perfectly, and I do all of that spontaneously. That is why I have always stayed out of the public sphere, because only those who become my formal devotees have, by that formalization, demonstrated their impulse to realize me in a manner that I can take seriously. Therefore, I bless all, but I cannot instruct all. I can only instruct those who demonstrate a real devotional response to me by becoming my formal devotees. Nevertheless, all are the same to me. I am everyone and everything. In this late time or dark epoch, all kinds of people act as if they are prepared to enter into the esoteric stream of spirituality, when, in fact, they have not even dealt with the foundation. However, that is not what happened in the reality consideration I entered into with my devotees. In that consideration, all aspects of life, money, food, and sex, religion, spirituality, egoity, everything that has to do with making it possible to move on to real transcendental spiritual practice, were directly addressed by me. That consideration was about all matters, conditional and non-conditional. It was non-puritanical. It was very straightforward. There was no double-mindedness or daintiness about sex or anything else. Therefore, devotees of mine are not hush-hush. I taught them everything about how to rightly deal with life below the belt. There is no phony self-purity involved. Indeed, phony self-purity and moralistic self-righteousness are themselves among the principal signs of the sex paranoia that characterizes the common and unspiritual world of social egoity and conventional bondage to unenlightenment. 3. Sex, or more accurately, emotional sexual life, is the primary obsession of human beings, especially in the earlier stages of life and in the beginnings of practice. Therefore, I, as an act of self-submission, in order to teach, address the emotional sexual matter very thoroughly in direct face-to-face, interactive dialogue with my devotees. Human beings are self-driven to fulfill their emotional sexual motivations to the extent that their urge to emotional sexual fulfillment has the force of a philosophy. Their involvement in emotional sexual life is, in effect, a philosophical commitment expressed at the personal level to find perfect self-fulfillment in the purposes of ordinary and altogether psychophysically defined and bound human life. The emotional sexual search is, therefore, a kind of utopian philosophy, a philosophy about being finally fulfilled and perfectly pleasurized in life. But the philosophy of the emotional sexual search allows human beings to ignore both their mortality and the ultimate, non-conditional, indivisible, divine, and transcendental spiritual condition of reality itself. That philosophy is false. Like the philosophy of scientific materialism, the philosophy of ultimate emotional sexual self-fulfillment is based on a misinterpretation of reality, a false presumption about reality. This emotional sexual business is altogether a nest of odd creatures, nasty little things, biting and screeching everywhere. This was obvious to Freud, but notwithstanding the accuracy and usefulness of many of his observations, even he did not want to really deal with it. Freud wanted to keep things safe on the psychoanalyst's couch, to eliminate emotional sexual problems with talk in an office. That is how he wanted to cure his patients, because he felt threatened by his own emotional sexual tendencies, and he wanted to bring sex under the control of the social ego. Thus, Freud suppressed himself, because he saw that the unmastered emotional sexual ego is wild and powerful. That suppressive dispositional point of view is not a workable basis for true religious and spiritual life. Nevertheless, the great tradition of humankind has characteristically operated in a manner similar to Freud by suppressing emotional sexual life in one manner or another. Thus, religious and secular thinkers typically think alike relative to this matter. But I am free in my impulse to serve the human, transcendental, inherently spiritual, and most ultimately divine freedom of all. So I have dealt with the cat out of the bag, or out of the closet. 4. I know what to do about sex. Most people do not know what to do about sex, so they generally just keep their pants on if they are proposing to be seriously involved in religious and spiritual life. But I really do know what to do about sex, and therefore I know how to serve and even how to suffer my devotees in this matter. I am not an ordinary man. What I do is unique. I struggled to straighten my devotees out about sex. No lily-white approach to dealing with sex can come even close to straightening anyone out. My reality teaching includes a complete consideration of emotional sexual life, and that consideration is an absolute straightener. There are all kinds of conventional social rules for controlling sexual behavior, but they are designed to serve the purposes of the social ego, and therefore have nothing to do with the transcending of egoity or spiritual realization. Merely to become a well-behaved social ego is not a sufficient basis for entering into the real transcendental spiritual process in my divine avataric company. The great tradition of humankind is, as a whole, unresolved and ambivalent relative to the entire matter of sexuality, and is even generally sex negative or sex paranoid in its orientation. All such puritanical righteousness must be gone beyond. Otherwise, one's emotional sexual egoity is never truly inspected and dealt with. In that case, attention remains fundamentally, even if unconsciously, bound in emotional sexual dilemmas of all kinds, therefore limiting the degree of real spiritual growth that is possible. I call my devotees to the transcending of any obstruction of energy, any dramatization of the self-contraction in relation to sex, or any other aspect of life. I really do not have a moralistic reaction to anything about the emotional sexual life of human beings. To me, emotional sexual difficulty, or whatever kind, is simply a sign of egoity in whomever it appears, and therefore it is simply something to be dealt with in a straightforward, non-problematic, non-puritanical, non-moralistic, and altogether non-paranoid or fearless manner. Thus, I have always approached emotional sexual matters in an open fashion throughout my life, in order to really deal with emotional sexual matters, so that emotional sexual integrity can be the basis for the development of real, by me, transcendentally spiritually awakened practice. My reality consideration, which continued for many years and covered every conceivable aspect of emotional sexual life, is summarized in the source texts of my divine avataric word. Thus, I am the one who has completed the great consideration of human emotional sexual life, and I did so for the sake of everyone. I am the one who has made it possible for human beings to totally comprehend the emotional sexual dimension of existence, and to completely transcend egoic reactivity, and to truly grow beyond the ordinary emotional sexual limitations that the worldly mind represents, and by all of this to have an altogether and in reality sane life. Indeed, such emotional sexual clarity and integrity is essential for the real transcendental spiritual process in my divine avataric company. 5. In the great tradition, various kinds of emotional sexual discipline have been required or recommended, but none of these disciplines were sufficient for the thorough transcending of the emotional sexual ego. In the only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam, the emotional sexual ego, and indeed the ego of money, food and sex altogether, must be really and truly gone beyond, and this must, in real and significant terms, begin in the foundation or second congregation stage of practice demonstration on the reality way of Adidam, as part of the from thence ongoing basis for real and true growth into and in the by me transcendentally spiritually initiated, and always newly by me transcendentally spiritually activated stages of practice demonstration in the only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam. Therefore, my devotees must deal with money, food and sex first, before there can be any advancement into the transcendently spiritually awakened stages of the reality way of Adidam. This is an essential part of my message and my revelation. Human beings must deal with the money, food and sex ego first. From the conventional point of view, my exhaustive consideration of emotional sexual life must be regarded as some kind of overindulgence in conceding to baseness, but such is not at all the case. Because human beings are already universally adapted to a sex-paranoid or sex-fearing world culture, my consideration of emotional sexual life was a profoundly important and absolutely necessary part of my teaching work. In the history of the great tradition, there has never been the freedom or the understanding to enter into the full consideration of emotional sexual life and bring that consideration to completion. The entire intention of my work with my devotees has been to allow people to live in freedom. 6. Anyone's sexual activity appears to be crazy and unacceptable, and in that sense wrong, when viewed from the point of view of the normative public face. Particularly in Western and Westernized cultures, the social personality is not supposed to have anything to do with sexuality or excrement. There are all kinds of taboos relative to what is below the belt, and those taboos lead to social and religious hypocrisy. The double-minded personality has a great fear of losing face, and the same is collectively true of double-minded society. The usual social demand is to not lose face, and in a very fundamental sense, loss of face has to do with embarrassment about what is below the belt. From the conventional point of view, people in the religious world are not supposed to even relate to sexual issues in public. Rather, they feel obliged to show the puritanical double mind. This is entirely a matter of face. Face is what the public personality game is about, and it seems to be fundamental to everyone's public discourse in conventional society. However, in private, behind closed doors, very human realities go on for the representatives of public religion. The same kinds of realities that are confronted in private by any human being. Unresolved emotional sexual issues and all kinds of manifestations of egoity lie behind all the closed doors of official religion. However, from the point of view of human authenticity and growth, the social expectation that people must be entirely different in their public persona than in their real personal life is absurd nonsense. And that absurd nonsense breeds scandal, truancy, personal internal conflict, neurosis, fear, violence, hatred, and even war. I have always worked to go directly beyond all of this. There must be honesty and straightforwardness, not double-mindedness and hypocrisy. What is fundamentally required is the elimination of the sex-paranoid culture of double-mindedness and the establishment of an open, free atmosphere for consideration. Only in such an environment can matters related to the emotional sexual character be truly inspected and resolved. Such an environment is difficult to find, and such an environment of open, free consideration is exactly the situation I submitted to enter into with my devotees. 7. In the 1960s, there was a well-known saying, "Make love, not war." Understood in the most profound sense, this saying suggests an important principle. Not that sex in and of itself can eliminate war, but that the transcending of emotional sexual egoity has everything to do with bringing an end to human conflict altogether. 8. Sex is not the great evil. Indeed, sex is not evil at all. Rather, egoity is the root and source of all evil and all problems. I have revealed and demonstrated that sex is transformed and made right and in due course transcended only through the process of transcending egoity. Therefore, sex itself need not and should not be regarded as an enemy. It is emotional sexual egoity that must be gone beyond. Thus, what must be most fundamentally addressed relative to your emotional sexual life is not sex in and of itself, but your egoic search for self-fulfillment by means of sex. While it is true that sex is not the great evil, it is equally true that sex is not the great salvation. In all the years of my divine avataric teaching work and my divine avataric revelation work, and indeed in my own years of testing by experience, I thoroughly demonstrated and proved that a sexually active practice carries no advantage and is not causative relative to the process of real God realization. Indeed, the most that can be accomplished by means of a necessary, profoundly seriously and necessarily conservatively engaged sexually active practice is to make one's emotional sexual practice compatible with the real transcendental spiritual process, whatever that requires in the individual case, such that sexual activity does not actively obstruct the transcendental spiritual process. For this reason, intimately sexually active yogic practice is, in the only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam, a possibility only for my congregationist devotees, including both my lay congregationist devotees and my forward lay congregationist devotees. My lay renunciate devotees and my Rishira Sannyasin devotees necessarily practice, and by virtue of their formal renunciate characteristics, are inevitably moved to practice single celibacy. And all necessarily congregationalist, sexually active practitioners of the reality way of Adidam, who grow into and within the intensive listening hearing stage of the only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam, will be spontaneously and transcendently spiritually moved to fully rightly conserve sexual activity, for the very reason that sexual activity itself, apart from the disciplines of right emotional sexual yoga, inevitably works against the fullest transcendental spiritual infilling by me and realization of me. 9. Contrary to the illusions of certain forms of conventional or traditional tantrism, no form of cultivating sexual energy can, in any sense, cause spiritual growth. That is to say, sexuality is not in any sense causative relative to spirituality. The illusion that sexuality can cause spiritual growth stems from the fundamental illusion that spiritual practice is a process that starts below and moves from there to above. That illusion is an unwitting validation of egoity, a declaration that, in effect, the ego must propel itself upward to the divine, thus taking heaven by storm. Such is, in reality, the exact opposite of what occurs in the real transcendental spiritual process in my divine avataric transcendental spiritual company. In that process, I, the bright divine reality in divine avataric person, come down, and I transcendently spiritually infill you. Thus, the only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam does not develop from below upwards. The notion or philosophy of from below upwards is the root error of the egoic and traditional spiritual search, suggesting that the dog must be washed from the tail toward the head. Below is not and never can be causative relative to what is above. Rather, what is above must purify and transform, and most ultimately enlighten what is below. That is how I do my divine avataric transcendental spiritual work. That is the nature of the real transcendental spiritual process in my divine avataric company. Thus, the real transcendental spiritual and yogic process in my divine avataric company is not a development from a sexual base or from any base that is below. In other words, the real locating and knowing of my divine avataric transcendental spiritual self-transmission is not itself a process of the return of sexual energy from below to above, or otherwise of negatively or otherwise egoically programming the body-mind self relative to sexual energy or sexuality itself. My divine avataric transcendental spiritual self-transmission comes from utterly above and beyond to pervade and purify and transform and awaken what is below. Nevertheless, in order to locate and know me transcendentally spiritually from above and beyond, you must surely discipline and turn to me on my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. Here, all of what is below, in emotional sexual terms and in all other terms, by preparing and always maintaining your total body-mind for my freely given divine avataric transcendental spiritual invasion. 10. I have revealed what is necessary to entirely transcend emotional sexual bondage and emotional sexual egoity altogether, in the context of the process of listening to me, and then hearing me, and in due course seeing me, as my formal devotee practicing the only by me revealed and given reality where Adidam. Thus, my work with my devotees relative to emotional sexual matters has not been a form of conventional tantra in which the energy of sexuality is harnessed for continued egoic purposes in the context of the advancing stages of life. Rather, in my work with my devotees, I revealed to them the intrinsically ego-transcending reality way of Adidam, including the right disciplining of emotional sexual life. I say to you and to all, true spiritual life is the transcending of egoity. Thus, the great purpose of my years of divine avataric teaching work and divine avataric revelation work was to reveal the complete way of transcending egoity. The complete way of transcending egoity is necessarily the complete way of devotional communion and ultimately most perfect identification with real or causal God or truth itself or reality itself. 11. From the time of my infancy, it has been obvious to me that human beings do not have access to a complete foundation or exoteric practice or outer temple, a practice which would fully account for the realm of money, food and sex, and which would fully prepare people for esoteric practice and all the inner temple of transcendental spiritual life. Therefore, I freely submitted to humankind, at first in the form of those who surrounded me in my early life, and later in the form of my devotees, in order to create this outer temple. The outer temple of the divine reality of Adidam is a great revelation and a great practice. In the setting of the great tradition, the consideration and revelation of the foundation practice has never been brought to completion. That consideration and revelation has been completed only by me. In this late time or dark epoch, human beings are becoming more and more deeply disenchanted with conventional religion and conventional answers. I myself was utterly dissatisfied with conventional religion and conventional answers, and it was for that reason that I entered into the ordeal of my years of testing by experience and my years of divine avataric teaching work and divine avataric revelation work. As a result of that great ordeal, I have made transcendental spiritual life possible for all on a real basis. Therefore, I call everyone to consider my divine avataric teaching word relative to real transcendental spiritual life in my divine avataric company, and I offer the divine reality way of Adidam to all who are moved to become my formally acknowledged devotees. That divine way is most fundamentally devotional recognition of me and devotional response to me, the one and very and self-evidently divine person of reality and truth, appearing here before you as the Rishira avatar Adidar Samraj. In this late time or dark epoch, the human world is ruled by the point of view of scientific materialism. Scientific materialism has deprived humankind of all profundity of view, relative to the nature and significance of the conditional universe, and relative to the divine nature of reality itself. Scientific materialism is a global cultural program which has so effectively supported the ego's motive to achieve a perfectly independent state of self-sufficiency that, as a result, the human collective has brought itself to the point of global destruction and universal despair. I have shown everyone the way out of that. I have shown everyone again where the divine is. Anyone who seriously studies my teaching word will see the virtue of it and the truth of the Adidam revelation. 13. I have been unconventional in my doings. It was necessary for me to function freely and unconventionally in order to do my divine avataric teaching work. Therefore I did so. All I have done has been with the right heart toward all. What I did in my years of divine avataric teaching work was not my method for revealing my own characteristics, but it was my teaching, my method for reflecting the characteristic of those who came to me. I submitted myself in order to teach them. Thus, in that process, I was not revealing myself. Rather, I was revealing my devotees to themselves. Such was the nature of my purity. I made that submission and did that work until the time came when I revealed myself as I am. Thus, during my divine avataric teaching years, I revealed the reality of Adidam to all, while simultaneously addressing the world and its present time realities. Now and forever hereafter, in my divine avataric self-emergence years, I have relinquished and gone beyond the teaching mode. Now and forever hereafter, in the fullness of my divine avataric self-emergence years, I am communicating myself directly and revealing myself fully. Now and forever hereafter, in my divine avataric self-emergence years, I am, in my time of direct and essentially wordless divine self-revelation. What I am doing is beyond ordinary discussion, and I am occupied with it constantly. 14. Adidam is not a conventional religion. Adidam is not a conventional way of life. Adidam is about the transcending of Adidam is not based on mythology or belief. Adidam is a reality practice. Adidam is a reality consideration in which the modes of egoity are transcended. Adidam is a universally applicable way of life. Adidam is for those who will choose it and whose hearts and intelligence fully respond to me and my offering. Adidam is a great revelation, and it is to be freely and openly communicated to all. 15. In this late time or dark epoch, the rug has been pulled out from under the feet of traditional religion. Anyone who seriously considers the modern Western intellectual and philosophical critique of conventional religion discovers that there simply is no basis in reality for conventional religious presumptions and ideas. For all who have despaired at the emptiness of conventional religion, I have revealed the truth again. And those who have not thus despaired, but who are content with conventional religion, should display the right moral disposition of cooperation and tolerance toward all who are not satisfied with the conventional answers. I call anyone who is attracted to me to exercise his or her free intelligence and true discrimination and true heart choice, founded in real self-understanding, and on that basis to become profoundly moved to me and heart committed to the practice of Adidam. Such free intelligence and true discrimination and real self-understanding are the real virtues of my true devotees. And the exercise of those real virtues is what the reality way of Adidam is about, not conventional piety or moralistic self-righteousness or puritanical idealism. 16. I was born in the West, and I had to make my divine avataric self-submission in the midst of that circumstance. I did not carry a tradition with me. I woke in the midst of nothing. Therefore, I am not a traditional figure, whether of the East or of the West. I am not an example of the great tradition. I have completed and transcended the great tradition. Everything I teach is something I have lived. Everything I teach about the great tradition, and everything I teach about life altogether. I did not get anything from books. I got it from no one. I did it all. I ate it all, and I transcended it all. That is how the great reality way of Adidam came into being. My divine avataric work of self-submission is not a development of any Hindu or Buddhist or other Oriental tradition or combination of traditions, not a development of the Tantric tradition or of the crazy wisdom tradition or of the Atyashrami tradition or the Abhut tradition. People can be helped to understand something about me by studying such traditions. Indeed, in any authentic spiritual tradition, there are elements to be studied which can help people to come to a full understanding of me. However, no such tradition or combination of traditions defines or fully describes me or the nature and significance of my work in this world. I do not belong to the alpha culture on the left hand or on ingoing or introverted side, just as I do not belong to the omega culture on the right hand or outgoing or extroverted side. I do not belong to any side at all. I am the whole here, WHOLE. I transcend all in this Alpha Omega world. All conflict comes to an end in me. All limitations, whether in the East or in the West, are gone beyond in me. All differences between East and West are resolved in me. There is no precedent for what I have done. The Adidan revelation is a unique transcending of all elements, East and West, in the entire great tradition of humankind. 17. I have no tribe. I have no traditional allegiances. I have no axe to grind, of any traditional or conventional kind. Mine is a free and spontaneous self-revelation. I am not here to be the center of a cult. I am here for the sake of free life. I am humankind. Therefore, those who love me love the truth that is in humankind, and that is reality itself. I am not here to be a conventional religious authority. I am an egoless, unarmored presence here. I am the self-evidently divine person in the midst of humankind. I am not an other to any one. I am not other to all and all. I am the egoless, divine self-nature, self-condition, source condition, and self-state of all and all. I am the conscious light of reality itself, all in all surrounding and all in all pervading and standing free as the heart of being. 18. For those who would embrace a life based on heart-breaking freedom, I am here. I am unique in the world. Let everyone come and bathe in my bright light.